Hi. Now on my YouTube channel in recent months I might have been moaning about the weather quite a bit. It's been very wet and very windy for a long time. On the other hand, it's now turned around. This is at least the 10th day of blue skies and sunshine, and it's a very convenient time of year for that to happen as well. It's early spring, just entering now the second week of March, and it's been really good. I've been out a lot, but it's still so difficult to find things to photograph. Most days I go out, I don't take any pictures at all. It's just research, recceing, trying to locate something I can come back and photograph later. But this morning's been a good session so far. In front of me here, I have a ringneck parakeet using a nest hole. Now, I often don't bother photographing ringneck parakeets because it's not a British bird, it's an intruding species, and I'm not a great fan of parrots. And that goes back to when I was a teenager and zookeeping and having to look after the parrots in the parrot house, and I didn't warm to them. They're very noisy, screeching birds. They used to drive me crazy. So I'm not a great fan of parrots, I'm afraid. Nevertheless, I should be photographing them because they are taking over in the UK. They're up in the Midlands now where I live. So this morning I've made up for lost ground and I've been photographing the ringneck parakeet.
Perhaps another reason I don't like these birds is I worry about the effect they're having on our native birds that also nest in holes like this. You can see the bird is enlarging this one, chipping away on the inside, but they use small holes, big holes, and I could see them competing with the jackdaws. They were fighting over the larger holes with jackdaws. This is the male bird, I assume, sitting waiting for the female who's still inside the hole. Interesting the way they use the bill to hold on to the tree as well as their feet. It reminds me of a prehensile tail on a monkey, an extra limb. And you can get 2 parakeets inside this hole. But while this is going on, you're surrounded by other parakeets too. They are incredibly numerous down in the London parks. All these pictures are taken in Bushy or Richmond Park. I'm glad they don't come into my garden because they are very noisy and it's a horrible screeching sound. I like waking up to a dawn chorus, but not a dawn chorus of ringneck parakeets. I've googled it to see what the experts are saying about the subject, and oddly the RSPB, the Royal Society for Protection of Birds, is against the idea of culling them. They feel they're well established now and nobody's talking about them being a threat. The threat seems rather obvious to me. They occupy so many of the holes in this park. And they can be right next to each other. They don't need their own territory, they're very gregarious, so you'll get a nest in one tree and another nest in the tree next door to it. And with each pair laying 2 to 4 eggs, well, I can see them spreading and becoming a huge problem. As I'm watching this, I think they're about to mate. I'm going to get a mating sequence. Now, if I was taking stills pictures at this point, I would be cursing that out-of-focus twig in front of the bird. But with video, it doesn't matter nearly so much. It doesn't really spoil the picture. It's a long sequence this. I've had to cut it because it went on for 3 or 4 minutes. And quite strange the way it keeps lowering its head and banging into the female. It's very important when you're shooting video to shoot various image sizes. You want the wide shot, the medium shot and the close-up shot. It makes it much easier to be able to edit afterwards. So I can cut here to a smaller shot and then cut back to a tight shot again. And then I decide this has gone on so long I should be doing some slow motion. So I change my settings again and it looks even weirder in slow motion. This is 120 frames per second, roughly 5 times slow.
There's always a lot of talk by photographers about equipment, which is the best lens, which is the best camera, and so little of it makes any difference. This is what makes the difference, lighting. And to get the best lighting, you've got to work at it. You've got to get up at 3-4 o'clock in the morning, drive to where you want to be. And it's tiring, but it's worth the effort. This is what gets you good pictures. And it's that first hour of the day, maybe the second hour of the day as well. And at this time of the year, you can actually photograph right through because the sun, even at midday, doesn't get too high in the sky. But by the end of March, then in the middle of the day, you start thinking about packing up because the sun is too high and you get very flat lighting. Now there's a parakeet's nest up here, which is not a small hole, it's quite a big hole. And that means that when the bird is flying out of it, it's able to open its wings. In the small hole, it sort of climbs out first and then opens its wings to fly off. But here it's flying directly from the hole, so I stand a chance of getting some flight shots.
So these pictures are taken over roughly a 2-hour period. I was getting 3,200th of a second or close to it with the lens wide open, and that's at 1600 ISO with the 150 to 400mm OM lens. I'm using the Pro Capture at 50 frames per second, which gives me continuous autofocus. And I had 10 opportunities and the autofocus nailed it perfectly on 9 of them. The time it missed it was my fault. Now they're not great flight shots, it's not the perfect opportunity, but it gives me a chance to talk about a different setting. Now to photograph this parakeet in flight, I'm going to use a setting I don't normally use. The parakeet is on the right hand edge of the picture, it's going to fly into the gap to its left. Now if I just left the autofocus on its normal setting, then occasionally when the parakeet disappeared down the hole and came back again, it would lose the autofocus and jump onto the background. To avoid that happening, I went into the super control panel and I changed the focusing points from all active, which is what I'd normally use, down to small. Now I'm going to have to use my model woodpecker to illustrate this. And now using the joystick on the back of the camera, the very small joystick, I moved that small cluster of focusing points right to the edge on the right hand side. And now I'm telling the autofocus to only concentrate and focus on that area. And so when the parakeet disappeared down the hole, it was still focused on the wood of the tree. And when the bird re-emerged, the subject detection would pick up on it again. But very importantly, this is only for that initial acquisition of focus. Once the bird flies, it will still track it outside of that area. It will track it across the entire picture. Now I can't get this woodpecker to fly, so I'm going to move the camera instead. You can see the subject detection box, the white box, stays on the bird outside of that area of focusing points we've selected. This applies if you use the large cluster size or the middle or medium size. It's only for the acquisition of focus. After that it will follow the subject outside of those focusing points. You can override this, but you've got to go into the menus to do that. You need to go to the autofocus menu, page 2, the second line down, continuous autofocus settings. There's 2 options. The top line is for stills photography, the bottom for video. We're going to do the stills. Then again, 2 options. The left hand one, all. After focusing on the subject once, keep focusing on and tracking it on the entire screen. That's the default setting. That's how we've got it at the moment. Go to the right hand option. After focusing on the subject once, keeps focusing on and tracking it only within the selected autofocus target frame. So now it will only focus within that cluster of focusing points that you've selected. I have never used this on the OM1 camera. In fact, I've never used it since we've had subject detection. It just isn't necessary anymore. Subject detection just works so well. Thanks for watching.